The views expressed are solely those of the speaker and not necessarily those of Paltalk.com, AVM Software, or its advertisers.
News Talk is online. News Talk Online is a production of Paltalk.com, the largest multimedia interactive program on the internet with more than 4 million unique users, on demand on YouTube and on iTunes. And every show is archived now on my website, GaryBaumgarten.com, where you can see my commentary on things in the news, and you get a chance to post your comments as well. Our good friends at CRN Digital Talk Radio syndicate us coast to coast across the United States of America to an additional 12 million households. And I am your host, Gary Baumgarten. My guest today is Jack Cloonan, who's sitting to my right, your left, I think. Before we get to you for a second, Jack, I wanted to ask Boaz, did you hear about the demonstration in front of the Danish embassy in Thailand today? They were carrying a poster, which you can actually see a link to on my website, asking for the head of the Danish cartoonist who made those cartoons, which a lot of Muslims believe is defamatory of the Prophet Muhammad. And the picture shows his decapitated head, a dog peeing on it, and the words on the poster are, "It must be cut off," meaning the guy's head. Let me just ask you a question, Boaz. Which do you find more offensive? The original cartoons or a poster such as that?
That's a difficult question, Gary, but obviously I find this act of demonstration against freedom of speech a lot more appalling and disgusting than the actual acts that were made against that is the cartoonists themselves that made the cartoons. But given that area of the world, Gary, as we know, in that area of the world, there's a very high populace of religious Muslims that were offended by the cartoonists. Now, I'm just going to try to be, I'm going to try to be just even here, Gary. I think that there should be an apology, and there should be more careful. People should think before they do these things, because people are going to be offended by these things. Yes, there's freedom of speech, and I agree with that, Gary, but freedom of speech does come with some responsibility.
Thank you for that, Boaz, and I'm glad to see Sylvia was able to join us today. I guess you were on an airport run yesterday to pick up a family member, and we missed you. Boaz didn't have anybody to harass him, We need you here, Sylvia, to keep the guy in line. Jack Cloonan is my guest today. He is an internationally respected security expert who has interrogated some of the most notorious al-Qaeda suspects during his 25 years with the FBI. Jack has extensive strategic knowledge and experience in the areas of investigation. He disagrees with President Bush's decision to permit unorthodox interrogation techniques of terrorists. I guess you find them counterproductive. I don't know. We watched this show 24 on Fox television, and we see Jack Bauer running to the rescue, and there's a bomb getting ready to go off, a dirty bomb in the middle of Los Angeles, and he holds the guy, he puts a chain around his neck, and he's going to tell me where the bomb is. Come on, you would do that, wouldn't you?
Absolutely, and I did it so often. It's unbelievable. I particularly like the one where they actually wire the guy up and do something with his chest and so on. Now that I do agree that, and I am opposed to the president's vetoing the bill. The measures that he's endorsing, particularly waterboarding and so on, I am opposed to it. Believe me when I tell you, the people that I ran up against and I sat across the tables from, if you will, were difficult people to talk to. There's no question about it. They all had blood on their hands. They all killed Americans. They all knew Sheikh bin Laden and Sheikh Zawahiri, and they worked for him. But interesting enough, over the course of time, you were able to deal with him. You can argue with him on an intellectual basis and so on. But interesting enough, everybody has a break point. And we were able to uncover what those break points were. And some of them, frankly, were rather interesting. You might find interesting that I had one guy basically sitting on the fence, spinning his wheels, and what I was doing to him to help him certainly cooperate was take him down to the local 7-Eleven store and allow him to play lotto, which, by the way, he did win. By the way,
Did he
it's a
split
great,
with you?
great country, by the way, because we had brought him out of the Sudan and brought him to the United States. But that particular guy, what really interested him is when we were able to smuggle his family out of the Sudan, and he did agree to cooperate with us up to a point. But once we got his wife out, it's interesting. She had never had a physical exam. I had custody of her and her children. And when they're paroled into my custody, they have no immigration status, so I'm responsible for them, but I did take them to a doctor. Now, interesting enough, in that medical exam, cursory exam, they found, in this particular case, the woman, she had a polyp, so at the beginning of cervical cancer, had it treated. And she came back to her husband several days later and wagged her finger at him, and I think those of us who married understand that very well, and said, "You will cooperate."
Really?
And from that point forward, once he crossed and became an apostate in his view, which is a traitor to the brothers, he couldn't stop talking.
Right.
He has a moral obligation to really do what his wife demanded that he do, but also he feels as though he's entrusted himself in you. And when I tell you the information that he told us, I mean, from A to Z, I knew everything that was going on in the day of the life of Osama bin Laden. I knew where he slept. I knew when he got up. I knew who drove him. I knew what the security detail consisted of. Everything down to the fact that they were carrying, certain type weapons and so on. So we learned an awful lot, including the fact that Al-Qaeda was training to use planes as weapons of mass destruction. Now that might interest some of your listeners because that was well before 9/11.
Then why did they tell us that nobody ever thought about that?
Well, I can tell you that I personally delivered all the information I got from that particular suspect and put that into the food chain. Now, what happens when stuff gets into the food chain?
Especially at the FBI.
It gets into the mixer.
Right.
I have no explanation
Right.
for, but assure me, let me tell you, that the United States government, on the day of that infamous presidential daily brief, I think it was August 6th, believe me when I tell you, the United States had information in its files that Al-Qaeda was going to use planes as weapons of mass destruction. They even went so far as to contemplate using ultralights, and they'd actually purchased a hang glider out on the West Coast, outside of California, and they had practiced through a hang gliding club what they would do, essentially a suicide bomber, explosive belt and hang glider. But they were pretty proactive.
I would think so. Has it gotten better? Do you think internally there within the FBI and between all the various agencies, is it better today than it was on September the 11th?
We are awash in information. There's no question about it. Are there antagonisms that still exist? Yes. Do we have the proverbial turf battles that we're all quite aware of, and certainly 9/11 Commission addressed that? Yes. The biggest problem we have today is understanding exactly what we have in our possession. And this is not to denigrate, this is not to criticize. I'm very proud of what we did, I'm very proud of representing the FBI, frankly. But what we don't have right now is the ability to tell you or any of your listeners if we know whether or not there's a plot unfolding